It's also annoying because I'm on a restream and it always is like lagged when it's actually started the stream. It's like on the YouTube end, it just says
Yeah,
sending data for like 10 seconds. Um,
yeah. Well, yeah. I only found out like last year. The millennial pause. Have you heard of that?
oh yeah, like the
Yeah,
reach
that's
back
where
from the
it comes
camera.
from. Yeah, well, it's crap like this because it's like, well, is it actually started or not? You know?
Yeah, but I think that does look like we are started now. So I just want to say, first off, thank you very much for coming on. I mean, I know you've got like these all these titans, all these massive YouTubers talking about this, and here you are willing to chat about it with little old me. So thank you very much.
Well, sure. I mean, I have been trying to go where there are some audience members. You had thousands of viewers, and even better, you're a different demographic than I might be running into most of the time. So even better.
For sure. But yeah, no, because I think because you are giving the positive case, I mean, I assume most people will be at least vaguely familiar, but I think it would be worthwhile because you are making the case for this. If you could uh, give your case for why stop killing games is the correct way to approach this issue and what you see the issue as.
Sure. So are we live, or should I go ahead
Yeah,
and
we're
start?
live.
Or? Okay, I wasn't sure. Uh, okay, yeah. So I'm the founder of the Stop Killing Games movement, and this is a reaction to me hating seeing video games destroyed. Where the general practice is you buy a video game, then at some undisclosed point in the future, the publisher disables it, but they keep your money and you can never play it again. And this has led to destruction of more video games than any other practice I'm aware of. And I've been kind of working backwards from my conclusion, which is just to stop this. And that's gone several different methods through government channels for some of them. But the big one we have going on right now is a European Citizens Initiative, where if it gets enough signatures, and it looks like it might, um, this goes before the EU Commission for them to hear it out and hopefully pass a law on it. And best I can tell, your position is you have similar views on the end goal, which is stop the games from being destroyed, but we have disagreements on how we go about this. So we we can try and figure it out. So,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say the similarity would be that I do think there is a real problem which Stop Killing Games identifies, which is this practice of they sell a game to you and then at some random point in the future you don't know when they just kill it and that you can no longer play it anymore. I agree that that is a real problem, but I would say the cause of that problem is intellectual property monopolies over it. Like, they'll have a monopoly over only Nintendo's allowed to make Pokemon games. And, even further, if they've got like some certain server software that they're running, only they are allowed to run that server software. I mean, that's why, and I think this is very much related to IP because, I mean, a lot of these games, the way they die is that they shut down the servers. And why do they have the server? Well, a lot of the cases it's for DRM, digital rights management, to call off to the server to make sure you really have a legitimate copy of that game. Of course, the rights being managed there are intellectual property rights, and I think if given that, I mean, I suppose we'll start there. Do you agree that IP is like the cause of this problem, or do you think it's more there's something else going on here?
I think it's definitely part of the problem. Is yeah, actually I saw your previous video that you made on this, and I disagreed with a few key parts, and this might be a good place to come in. Um, like one part you mentioned that, roughly paraphrasing what you said here, you said there was nothing stopping people from kind of taking over except the IP, and nothing stopping them from maintaining defunct games. I would argue that's the number two culprit when it comes to this, and I might have some evidence for it. I think the main villain is that it is hell trying to to reverse engineer a server emulator of a game, not having the code or documentation for it. it tends to take geniuses years of work on this. And most games of this nature never get that treatment. So I kind of agreed with almost everything you said in that video regarding the copyright creating barriers. Like, yeah, the community could maintain this, but they're blocked by it. But I think that's the number 2 villain, not the number 1 in this particular case.
Sure. So I suppose then the real question would be, which one of these has more importance? Is it more important to, I suppose, stop killing games? Because maybe you are right. I don't know. You know, obviously, you've spoken to a lot more people in the industry than this. Maybe you're right that even if you had no IP, there still would be a lot of games which end up dying because it's just prohibitively expensive to reverse engineer. But then my point would be more like, well, it's actually more important to have the IP gone than to sort of force people to do these things.
Yeah, it's okay. I can clear up any technical stuff on this for you, or most of it. But the way it works is like for the community trying to reverse engineer. Yeah, that's an unreasonable ask of pretty much anyone. It's a miracle in my eyes when it happens. But if that same community could see the code, it could be up anywhere from a matter of hours to days. So but the thing is, even if the company says like, okay, fine, you can do whatever you want with it, but we're withholding this part of it, and you're never going to have access to that. There's the kind of the practical element of it that comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think ultimately, if a company wants to operate in this way where they have their trade secrets, you know, like the secret Coca-Cola formula or whatever, I think it's a company's right. If they want to keep something secret, that's perfectly legitimate in my view. It only becomes a problem when they, you know, prevent you, if you've learned that secret, from using it yourself, which is the IP. So I suppose then the Stop Killing Games proposal, it rests on this idea that the government is in some way justified to come in and tell people with their own private property where they want to keep their own secrets that they have to give up their secrets. They have to tell people how their servers run. They have to reveal the code. I think that's immoral. I think it violates their rights to do that.
Yeah, here's where it gets complicated. Okay, I actually had 2 thoughts, but I just forgot one, so I'll go for the other one. One, we're literally not doing that, but there's some tricky nuance to it. What we're saying is when the company, in order to sell the game to the user, a copy of it, they have to give some rights to access it just in the first place. That's part of what the exchange is for. But in almost all these contracts that are online only, they tend to have terms like they can terminate at any time for any reason. And under the EU law, it's being tested. It hasn't been confirmed either way. But it could be terms like that aren't considered lawful in that market. So what would be happening is it would just be invalidating that term. But by doing that, since they're not giving any expiration date, they're asking for, they're kind of putting themselves on the hook for that commitment that they already made in the rest of the license agreement that, yes, you have access to this game. But we actually can't ask specifically for the source code or the server binaries or specific details on documentation because it does run up against copyright law on that. So it's kind of a roundabout way to getting to a similar place. And if you feel like I didn't address something, just throw it at me again because my mind slipped for a second there.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly fine. But I would say, you know, obviously I'm coming at this from a very hardcore anarchist perspective, so this is going to be very alien. So I do appreciate that we're going to have to go through it, you know, piece by piece. But I would view this as I think this is still the government going in, and it's in a very subtle way. So you're making reference to like the terms of service agreements and stuff like that, where it has like some sort of clause in there. It's like, well, we can stop this service at any time. Now, I would say that things like terms of service aren't actually a valid contract. I think that the only sense in which a contract is valid if it is the transfer of title to scarce property. So it would be like me selling a shoe to you. That is a scarce good that I'm transferring to you under some terms. Maybe you have to give me money and then I transfer it to you or whatever. So I think the actual place where terms of service and end user license agreements and stuff like that come in is they're basically just a shield against all of the already existing government regulations. So of course governments do recognize these things as valid. So I think to the extent that you are damaging this shield, you are making them more vulnerable to the government coming in saying, because what would it actually look like to invalidate this term about they can stop the service at any time? Like, surely it would look like they have to then operate their business in a certain way in compliance with the new regulation.
Yeah, a point to bring up. I remembered the other thing. Once again, I'm kind of working backwards from my conclusion of I just want the games to stop being destroyed. And it's not like I'm actually not trying to advocate, no, this is the way it must happen. I'm just trying to find a way. And it's almost like a balancing act, trying to find this kind of chink in the armor where, on one side, there's the copyright law saying blocking this and it never happening. On the other side, the industry is trying to block it in another way. But this was like kind of an opening I found. Like, I've thought of it before as kind of like in The Hobbit, Smaug has this one opening in his scale there. That's kind of what I'm doing. It's like, I think I have no chance to take it on other terms. And as for government involvement, let me say right now, this is all coming from a place of last resort, because I've been making videos on this for like 10 years now, and it's bothered me for decades earlier. I kept hoping the industry would kind of catch itself on this issue and realize, oh, wait, we're actually destroying the customer products. This is going to be bad PR. We shouldn't do this. And instead, no, it's like they just keep accelerating, and then make statements how they're promising more of it. And just some of the statements get kind of audacious. So it's, there have actually been attempts at boycotts that have failed miserably in the past. So it's like, even what I'm doing, it might not work, but I am seeing a possible chance this could work, is kind of where I'm coming from on this. So if there's an alternative, I'm all for it. if I think it works,
Sure. So I think this does actually get back into the IP issue then, because you were sort of saying before that, well, maybe abolishing IP wouldn't work, and maybe they would be able to maintain the secrets, and it would be basically impossible to reverse engineer. But you're also saying there, like, boycotts not working. I'll tell you one thing which would make boycotts way more effective is if somebody was able to have a competition. Like, anybody can boycott Starbucks because they can go to a different coffee shop. But if Starbucks is the only one who are allowed to make coffee, then it makes a boycott a whole lot harder, right? If I could make my own Pokemon game, Pokemon Uranium, then boycotting Nintendo becomes a whole lot more effective.
Yeah, I figure you would understand better than most that, all these games, just media in general, art, music, I think literally they're considered creative monopolies because, they have like you said, like with Pokemon, I can only get that from Nintendo. I can't just go to Valve or EA and get their Pokemon. It has to be there because they own that the way it operates. So, yeah, when you mentioned the abolishing intellectual property, my mind kind of goes two places immediately on that. One is from in the present, I would think like, okay, I have no idea how you would get from where we are now to like actually getting that passed in governments somewhere or just effective rule or whatever that would actually happen. Like, let's say that is the way that you do it. I don't know what the steps to that would be. If I can see some obvious barriers, actually. But the other place it goes is like, okay, let's say we managed to get that through and we've abolished intellectual property in general. To me, that you mentioned, that almost strikes me as something out of like science fiction, where I'm not saying, oh, that can never happen or that's impossible or would never work. I'm saying that has so many knock-on effects. I have no idea where that goes. I can think of some real obvious surface level problems, but yeah, maybe you can walk me through some of those for the various things. But that's kind of where it goes. It's like on one hand, there's the practical element where I just have no idea how you get there, and the other, it's like, well, if we do get there, this'll. My thoughts are, well, maybe it does end up better, like you say, or maybe it's similar, but some things are better, some things are worse, or maybe it's a little worse. I don't know. I'm curious about that part of it. So.
Sure. I mean, I think that's very apt term there. That it sounds like sci-fi, because I think that if we did abolish IP, you would get like an unforeseen level of flourishing. And I mean, if people obviously, I've got my own video on this, but also a couple of very, very good videos going over like more specifically the creative and sort of gaming side of it. There's one by Unique Namosaurus. He's got a couple of very good videos on it, and also a guy called Tim Deuces. He references my video. The knock-on effects would be incredible. There's this book by Boldrin and Levine, Against Intellectual Monopoly, where they go over the history of areas where there haven't been IP and there has been IP, and where there isn't IP, you get way more innovation out of it. It's like just an astounding level of innovation. I mean, like, people are always like, maybe like the more rightist warhawk types in the US. They're always complaining about, like, well, China, they keep stealing our IPs and they're out competing us and they're doing this and they're doing that. It's like, well, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, they're out competing you because they're able to copy over there. They're able to use those US patents and freely innovate on it, and that's why they're like kings of manufacturing innovation now. So yeah, I think that would be the main knock-on effects, as we can stick to that, just to not get too many things on you at once.
Sure. Well, I guess my first thought on this, and maybe you have an answer for it. To me, it's like I'm going into the fog on this, so I don't know. That, like, again, the surface level thing I can think is, like, in the transition, a whole lot of our society is already defined by IP. So if we just abolish that, there's going to be a lot of people immediately who aren't able to earn a living and that sort of thing. Now, that strikes me as I think that's totally something that could be solvable, but I'm wondering what the answer would be then, because this isn't something you just remove one gear and then it still works. It's like, I think you'd have to remove a bunch of different parts for it to kind of hit equilibrium again. So speaking personally, I'm a big believer in, was it Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So I figured, like, the number one, for a large population, one thing I'm very much in favor of is them having, food, water, shelter. So I'm wondering so if you have like this big displacement of all these people running jobs, I think there would be an amplification of a problem we already have right now, which is what do you do when you have a society that has more people who need to support themselves than there are jobs available for doing so? And again, there might be answers to this, but to me, that strikes me as like the immediate thing I would be thinking about if you had this change.
Sure, and you're pointing to an absolutely correct thing, which is that, a large amount of our economy is allocated towards, a lot of the resource and capital is allocated towards things on the premise that there is this monopoly protection over ideas, over patents, over copyrights, and all that sort of thing. Like, all of the Disney lawyers are going out of business overnight. The patent attorneys, they're all going out of business. And, those resources will get shifted elsewhere. But this is related to a concept in Austrian economics called malinvestment. So all of the current allocation of capital, that's all wrong investments. They've invested that incorrectly. And so when you kind of pull the rug out from under it, when you kind of go, hey, well, we're in reality now, suddenly it becomes, they've got to reallocate all those means. It reveals that they were malinvestments. So this is why we get things like recessions every, decade or so. It's because the fractional reserve banks, they introduce all this fiat money, this fake money, which basically the effect of it, I won't go too deep into economics, not because this is an economics debate.
We're spending money we don't have.
Yeah.
From the future, essentially.
Yeah, and what that does is it makes people think, whoa, a whole lot more has been saved than we actually has been saved. So investors invest in really long-term things like, oh, people will be wanting a whole bunch of houses, but whoops, actually they don't. And so the Austrian claim is that the bust, that's not the bad part. That we went into the recession isn't bad. The recession's good. That's like the hangover. It's you coming back to reality and trying to reallocate those means. So I would say, to those people who are going to be worse off in the short run, in the long run, all the just people in society, all the people who are really innovating and being good, and I would say the vast majority of people, pretty much everybody, is going to be better off in the long run under a zero IP regime. You just got to get through that bust. You got to get through that hangover, and then you're back to reality again.
Okay, well, I'll walk through again. This is just me kind of my brain trying to figure out where this might go. So I'm just speculating here. I guess what I'm thinking is, okay, so there's the argument that everybody, there could be a wreck in the short term, but in the long term, it works out. I guess what I'm wondering, I could kind of see this almost just like shifting, like the cards where they from one pile to another, but it ends up being a similar dynamic. Where, okay, I'll go to games, for example, but it can apply to other things. Like if games, let's say there's like somebody who makes a game that would normally be a hit, but they're not that well known. There would be, I think, an industry popping up immediately that's on the prowl for stuff like this. And they see, okay, this game's for sale for $10, but like, we're just going to copy it, put our name on it, and we're going to put it out for $2 immediately and market it everywhere. And I think you still would have games being made, but I think it would just kind of flow towards these kind of conglomerates that are best positioned to sort of be in control of the distribution, or not like 100% control, but like have an obvious like market advantage, so that any game that gets out, they're immediately going to undercut it and kind of take it. I think if I'm not misunderstanding the intellectual property dynamic that you're talking about. So again, I think people would still make games on their own, but it would be it might not be so profitable for them, I guess, or might not bring them enough to settle in. But I could see this going into other categories too, where like, okay, if you're abolishing lots of IP, then maybe the manufacturing hubs are kind of the new lords of the land now, because because if everybody can manufacture things, well, then I think the power could start drifting towards whoever can do it the best or most efficient or the fastest, get to the most people, that sort of thing. And if you had some competition, it seems like over time, the competition can sometimes be absorbed. Where they say, okay, we have a competitor, like let's say you're manufacturing cars or something, and they're competing with us. We don't like this. We're just going to put all our resources into buying them out so we can absorb them. And then now we're even bigger over time. We can take the hit. And setting up your own car manufacturing plant, that's not the easiest thing for a smaller person or a smaller company to do. So I could kind of see, I'm not sure it necessarily solves it. It's different for sure, but that's just my basic idea of where it might go. So.
Sure. So there's a few things in there. The concern over like, well, I make this tiny little game, some indie game, and then some big games publisher just comes along and goes, oh, we'll just copy that and release it ourselves, or modify it or whatever, and reuse it. I don't think this is too much of a concern. I mean, look at the open source software community. A lot of software outside of games is open source, but like it's not like Microsoft just comes along and sees RipGrep and goes, well, we're gonna remake RipGrep ourselves, and everybody will use our version, or we'll remake whatever else, and then everybody will use ours. We'll make our own Linux kernel, right? I don't think that's generally not how it happens. Generally, the first mover, they get the advantage there. They're the ones who people go to because they're the originator. You want the original. I want to go to the guy who made HTMX because he's gonna make the best HTMX rather than just some random person who forked it and I don't know how good they are. But then also the other sort of problem you brought up was this idea behind, well, if I've got like this big car manufacturer, I might just try and buy out all the little car manufacturers. Now that type of thing, it only works if there are patents, because then I can buy their patent pools, and then nobody else is allowed to make those types of cars. But on a truly free market, this has been tried before. You know, there was this one case of Herbert Hoover, I believe his name was, or that might be the president, Herbert something. He was like this chemical magnate in the US, where there was this German cartel which was like, hey, we're going to move into the US, we're going to buy you out, buddy. We're going to, you better stick it to yourself. You know, because he tried to like start selling in Europe, and they were like, no, you stay in the US, we'll sell in Europe. And he's like, no. So it's like, okay, well, we're going to run you out of business. We're going to sell way cheaper in the US, and you're going to be, you know, predatory pricing is what they call it. And then you'll be out of business. And so what this guy did, he's okay. He just stopped selling in the US, and he just started buying up all this cheap chlorine and stuff, which kept coming in because they tried to predatory price him. He just bought it up and started selling off in Europe, and he was making a massive arbitrage out of this. So I really don't think Herbert Dow, that's it. Somebody just mentioned it. So I don't think this type of predatory pricing strategy, A, has never worked, and B, I just don't think theoretically that it can work in general.
Well, okay, you brought up 2 points there. Well, for the predatory pricing thing, you mentioned Starbucks earlier. I've heard this from people who know much more about this, that one strategy Starbucks uses in many cities is they'll just open up, let's say there's one coffee shop that they can't buy out or that's competing with them, that it's too good, like, you know, the quality. What they'll do is they'll open up free stores and kind of like surrounding them, almost like a triage, so that every person going to get the coffee, they run by Starbucks first. And the thing is, they'll operate those at a loss. And the thing is, the diehard customers will still go to the good coffee shop, but people who just want a cup of coffee or want what's most convenient will go to the nearby one. And since Starbucks is enormous, they can operate those at a loss for a while. And then when the store finally shuts down, then Starbucks shuts down the 2 other stores that they didn't need and were just there to keep the other one out of business. And that can be a pattern that they maintain. And you mentioned people want to go to the original. That's true for some things. Like I think especially for like writers, if they're known, you know. But let's say you mentioned that indie game that people didn't know this person, but the big publisher gets to them first, and then they're putting it out, so everybody knows about the big publisher, and maybe word would get back that somebody else made this. But again, if the big one's undercutting their price by 5 times, I think most people are going to go towards the small one. In the United States, Walmart has been blamed for shutting down a whole lot of like mom and pop shops, because the mom and pop shop might offer something at a reasonable price, but then Walmart can undercut them, and then you can get all these other things there too. So I think for some things, that dynamic you're talking about would remain true, where the competition is just too fierce that it never really catches on one way or another. Like I could see, I think like the more complex and the more investment like the industry requires in order to like get in on the ground floor, like I'm thinking of something like manufacturing CPUs or GPUs or something. That requires incredible investment to try to get something set up like that. So even lots of small companies just can't compete like that. I think you would see more of like a stranglehold on that sort of thing to a degree.
So I mean, I think the only the only way you get these strangleholds is if you have some sort of state protections. Because I mean, yeah, I agree. Like Walmart, it's great. You get to go in there, you get everything, and like it's way cheaper. But that's not necessarily a problem. I mean, like, you know, the paradigm example of this would be oil. You know, you got to have a lot of capital investment to start your own oil company, and you know, people point to Standard Oil, which was like, you know, supposedly one of these natural monopolies because you need so much investment to get into the oil game. But what they really don't tell you about that story is that, you know, Standard was continually lowering their prices in order to stay in the game because they just had a more efficient process than anybody else. And by the time the Trust Busters got in, Standard's peak market share was about 90%. They had gone down to 60% by the time the Trust Busters got involved. So they were already losing market share to these more nimble, smaller firms who were able to just get in there. You know, they weren't super bloated, because at a certain point, as a company grows in size, there's this concept called the economic calculation problem, where it would apply to something like the Soviet Union, where the Soviet Union, they controlled everything in the economy. But then they can't do profit loss calculations, so they don't know if they're being efficient or not. You know, the way a capitalist would do it is he's going, hey, we're losing money on this line of production, fix it, boys, you know. But the Soviet Union, they can't do that. They don't have no way to know whether they're being efficient. But this happens also to companies when they get big in size. You know, Standard Oil, if they swallow the entire market, well, suddenly they've got internal calculation problems. So there's diseconomies of scale as you go on. And that's why no company can really stay in dominant space in any market forever unless they have government protections.
Yeah, I don't know. I think for some really complex. Okay, well, I think we're getting a bit off track here. I guess what I was thinking though is where do the jobs kind of reemerge, I guess, from if you're losing all these jobs for, I mean, like, let's say software developers, where I think you would have, there's plenty that would be able to have support through just essentially like a donation page or something like that. But then there's like a whole lot that I think wouldn't see that because they're not as like fun or interesting for people to notice. Like the software that like allows like the networking protocols on your particular card to interface with the operating system. Like that might be more thankless work if somebody's not getting paid and not people just don't notice, that sort of thing. I guess where do the jobs reemerge? I guess if you have like the shock up front, but then where does it balance into equilibrium, I guess?
Sure. So like the sort of not very satisfying answer, which I think is the actually correct answer, unfortunately, is that I can't tell you any specifics about where the means would be reallocated. And this is specifically because, you know, I'm not the central planner, and I don't think anybody can be the central planner. Like, that's what makes the market so brilliant, is that it will just find, you know, these software engineering jobs, if people lose their jobs with no IP, the market's going to just find the best place for them. They're going to go where the money is. They're going to go where their interests lie. And all scarce means, including labor, will be shifted exactly where it needs to be. Or at least it'll tend to shift in that direction. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. It's not like utopia or anything. But it's only the market which can do that. When you have these interferences in the market, like IP, or like any sort of regulation, that hinders this process.
Well, I guess what I was thinking is you got to be careful with that, because if you're displacing millions of people and they don't have an obvious place where they're going to be getting their money to pay for groceries or getting evicted, you might have to worry about them reestablishing some sort of government because they're desperate. They're saying, okay, well, the market's too slow to respond, and we need to eat today, and we need a place to stay this week. But this guy is going around saying, hey, let's just form a war band, and we're just going to take over some of these farms so we can eat, and we'll start establishing a new government. Like, you might have, you know, I'd say that's paramount to figuring that out. Like, how are people going to, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how are people going to eat? Because listen, a lot of people can deal without having a job or just figuring things out, but they can't deal without having food in their stomach for very long. So I'd say that would be the number one thing to focus on.
Sure. I mean, I do think that, you know, food production and all sorts of production, you know, if I did get my button where I could just abolish all governments right now, it would become a lot more bountiful pretty much instantly. It would be very quickly. We would have way cheaper food, way cheaper water, all these sorts of things. But, you know, absolutely. I agree with you that if I just had this button where I could abolish all governments right now, very quickly they're going to reform governments. Because ultimately, the reason why we have governments in the first place is because most people want there to be governments. And that's sort of why I do what I do. I want to try and convince people that there shouldn't be any governments. And, you know, if enough people, you know, some motivate enough minority of people end up agreeing with me, then pretty quickly we can abolish any sort of government.
Yeah, it remind me of this is a layman joke, about like the two cows analogy. Like you have two cows. There was one for anarchy that's like you have two cows. You either take them to the market and get fair price for your milk, or get shot by bandits and have them taken from you. So I think that dynamic might come into play when you have like the drastic change, But uh, well, we kind of jumped. This kind of went differently than I thought because we sort of jumped to the future, far future part first. I guess what are your thoughts on how do we go from here to what you're describing, like to abolishing the IP law? From like what steps would that involve?
Sure. So the most fundamental step would be advocating the abolition of IP, and I think a guy called Stephan Kinsella, patent attorney, he has a book called Against Intellectual Property. He's like on the forefront of this type of movement, because that's the fundamental step, is convincing people that IP is illegitimate. It's a type of monopoly grant. It's not even property, like strictly speaking. And that would be the fundamental step. More particular, any sort of particulars come from this more fundamental, so that I normally focus on the fundamental. But more particularly, could you just say like, hey, look, if it's the US case, just go like, hey, the US Constitution doesn't actually like authorize a lot of these things that you're doing with respect to IP. I'm obviously not a lawyer, so I can't speak on specifics. But like, you just start chipping away at it like that. And over in the UK, it just got introduced by the Statute of Anne in like 16 something. You just say, hey, well, let's start chipping away at this. Just start finding areas of intellectual property rights and going, hey, we can peel it back this much. Let's peel it back this much. Let's let the market flourish. Let's let people copy these things. Because I think some level of IP is baked quite deeply into the legal structures.
Oh yeah.
But to whatever degree you're able to get rid of it, if you see some proposal to get rid of it, absolutely advocate that proposal. Say, yep, we need to do this now. Whether it be just like related to killing games. Hey, you're no longer allowed to have, if you haven't touched this IP for 10 years, like, goodbye. Like, you can't just hold on to this thing forever. Like, let's reduce the length of time that it applies, keep reducing it, and that would be very good, at least a very good step towards it.
I'm in no way against that. Like, once they're done selling it, supporting it, having it enter public domain or something like that. But that kind of comes back to like what I'd like to see versus what I thought was possible. The reason, really, this all stems from me just kind of doing research on it. And the two big actions that I saw, me, who's just a YouTuber, I don't not have a lot of no political experience really on this. The openings I saw were that the law was, in some countries, was undefined on this. There was a gray area on it already. So I was kind of waiting for a test case to kind of push forward. And there was a very convenient game like that got shut down last year. And so I thought, well, I don't think I could, go through the process and get people elected or change the law, but I can get a bunch of people to send complaints to a consumer protection agency. And so I eventually rallied thousands of people to send complaints to this consumer protection agency, or multiple ones actually, with their receipts saying like, hey, they took the game away. It's like, is this legal? And that's still being decided on. It's been over a year. So it makes me think, if it was legal and the no-brainer, they would have just told us by now. I think they're having to unravel what a nightmare this is from a legal perspective. And the other, with the initiative, which was still very ambitious, we just, quotes, needed 1 million people to sign it, but we had a year to do it. So that struck me as like, well, maybe this is delusional, or maybe it's not, so that struck me as an opening. But like with abolishing Yeah, for example, in the United States, I saw no openings really. And you mentioned like trying to chip away at copyright with games. Here, I can maybe put a link in the chat here. Um, there, there was an organization, the Video Games History Foundation, where they were trying to get an exemption to the DMCA to support researchers remotely accessing a game that like a library or even a company might have, just to access it for research purposes that are no longer being sold. And they got denied, like just flat out. They tried everything they could do to get that. Yeah, if there were no openings, I never would have started this at all. I would just like, okay, we're just screwed because this is too locked down. So that's, yeah, so don't think I'm advocating like, oh no, this is the way it must be, or this is the best way to do it. It's like, I'm seeing a opening that might work. It's kind of where I'm coming from on all this. I don't really see the opening on intellectual property being abolished. Like even through there might be, but like through the routes I took, like the European Citizens Initiative, there's two aspects of that it might get blocked on. In addition to saying what you want done, you have to reference existing directives that show the EU has authority to act on this. And you might be able to I mean, it would be, you know, unprecedented, but you could see, well, since you created the laws on this, you can uncreate them. That could go through. However, one of their stipulations is you can't propose what they call utopian measures, like we're going to end poverty or everybody gets a flying car. It could be the EU Commission considers what you're proposing a utopian measure, in which case, boy, you would have to go, you essentially have to get members into government, I think, that are backing what you're talking about to go ahead and tear the law down on that. I mean, it's the sort of thing where it's like technically not impossible, but man, practically, I wouldn't have a clue how to do that, especially when you may not have a solid answer for the, okay, well, wait, what do we do if everybody's losing their job over this? Because that's going to be hard. That's going to be a hard sell. So you really need to win them over on something, I think, if you would get a populist angle on it.
Sure. So I would say on like this front, things can happen way quicker than you know, not calling it you particularly, like than most people would think. Pretty much everybody. People don't have a really good intuition about how quickly things can change in politics. Like an example from my movement, the libertarian movement, it started with a guy called Murray Rothbard, and in about 60 years, from 8 people in his living room, 60 years later, the president of Argentina is talking about anarcho-capitalism. Like, it can happen very fast. Or the Bolsheviks, they were a minority of power in the Russian parliament, but from some pretty, neat maneuvering from Lenin, they were able to take all of Russia and beyond, right? Things can happen incredibly, incredibly fast. You just have to get the movement up and running, and then when the atmosphere is correct, you can strike. Like, I mean, Donald Trump, obviously, he's in office now. One of the first directives he did was releasing a Bitcoin prisoner, Ross Ulbricht. He was a prisoner for many years. He ran the Silk Road. Libertarians have been fighting to get him released for years, and we were able to get him released. That would be unthinkable 4 years ago. Unthinkable to get Ross released, and it was able to happen.
Yeah, actually, I was meaning to bring that up, actually. I agree completely. Is that I was thinking if you really wanted to push something through that you didn't that you just didn't have the power structures for it at the time, basically you would get your movement ready. This could go for almost any movement, really. You get your movement ready to charge in when there is some sort of collapse or disaster or something, that people are going to be kind of, if there is a collapse of a system, people are going to be scrambling for something that works. And whoever arrives at the scene first could kind of set the new order for a long time. No, I agree on that. I guess that's less compelling from my side because I was looking at from the perspective of if I don't, I feel like it's been the opposite for games specifically. Obviously, it's a far less serious issue than a lot of things you dive into, but I was seeing the window closing on this because you had a younger generation that, by and large, isn't even aware what we're asking for is possible because they've only known the mainstream examples where it just seems like it's not. And so I felt like we were kind of like losing the perspective on this. And it's also something we were always on the back foot on because when a game shuts down, vast majority of the time, it's only a small minority of people who care about that. But over time, you know, some people might care about this game that shut down or they care about this one. So it kind of adds up over time, but it's always a minority, whereas people really pay attention to things that are happening right now. But if they've already moved on to something else, you're always on the back foot on this. So it was just a lot of dumb luck we were able to kind of push this through on the existing system. For those kinds of tactics that you're mentioning, I mean, I feel like I could, well, it's an unknown. You know, you could be waiting 3 months or you could be waiting 30 years, you know? So it's, that leaves a lot more to chance than even what I'm doing, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. But I would say, like, you know, I don't begrudge you for being like this is your issue and you're gonna focus in on that. You don't have to be like a full political philosopher or anything to have opinions on this type of stuff. It's perfectly fine for you to, you know, be clearly starting a very successful movement here. What I would say is that I think the movement is going in the wrong direction. It is taking a problem which, in my view, was started because of government regulations, and it's trying to add more government regulations onto this, which that can only end up making the situation even worse than it currently is. And I mean, you know, it might not be apparent how, in which way it'll make it worse. Like, you know, plenty of regulations have come out where people are like, there's no way this could possibly go wrong. And it goes very, very wrong. Like, I mean, net neutrality, everybody thought that regulation, which was an Obama era regulation, by the way, it wasn't there at the beginning of the internet. People thought, no, if this gets abolished, the world's going to fall. We're not going to have the internet anymore. It gets repealed and, you know, nothing really happens. These regulations, they even if they have the best of intentions, they end up just causing more problems. They just bloat the government more and force these companies to make their end user license agreements even longer and more incomprehensible.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to disagree with you that this is like a guarantee. Like, there's no way this can fail. It certainly can. I can think of a couple ways, and that's actually something we're going to be the organizers are going to be very wary of if they get to talk to the EU Commission, because there's a couple angles it could fail. But I guess, yeah, this pushes to another topic I kind of disagreed with. I wasn't sure if you were saying this in kind of just like a broad, more snarky sense, or you meant it more literally. Because like in your caption on one section, you had regulations never work. And I was wondering, did you mean that literally or just kind of in general? Or see, I would say regulations sometimes work. And if we disagree, we can dig into that, you know?
So you know, obviously that is like, you know, a more vague title. I can't get too specific with like
okay, I'm not trying to hold you to it. Yeah.
So I would say it depends on what you mean by work. You know, like the regulation to get rid of alcohol prohibition, it works in the sense that it definitely makes it harder to get alcohol, but it doesn't work in the sense that there's the seen and the unseen. There are all these unseen consequences which come from it, and that's the sense in which I'm saying it doesn't work. It has these knock-on effects that you can't see coming, and they cause all sorts of problems. They cause the mafia to come about. Like, who could have foreseen that coming? Apart from like an economist, maybe.
Yeah, no, this could have some knock-on effects. Though I've tried to sort of gameplay out several of them, and it actually tends to come back to market dynamics to keep several of them in check. But that's the other thing we're coming from is you're saying like, oh, adding government to, like, how can that be the answer to a problem that government started in the first place? Well, we're coming from a place where we have almost nothing left to lose on this, because from a gamer's perspective, or a lot of gamers, the worst thing that can happen to gaming is that games you care about get destroyed forever and you can never play them again. So it's like, even if there are knock-on effects, which I think our odds are good that there wouldn't be terribly bad ones. It's like, oh, okay, so you mean they're destroying my games now? If we pass this, then they're going to keep destroying our games. I mean, it's kind of like trying to talk somebody out of, like, who's on death row, is saying, oh, you shouldn't try to escape. They might kill you. It's like, yeah, so, it's, but I mean, no, it is counterintuitive. It's probably a dumb analogy, but I was thinking, with the fight fire with fire, that is something firefighters can do, where you think, okay, if a building is on fire, how could more fire possibly help it? But sometimes if you can flash it in the right way and it just deprives the oxygen, it might end up kind of nullifying both of them. Again, we're not saying I'm not saying it's a slam dunk. I think there are ways it could go wrong, but I think the odds are decent on it.
Sure. I mean, I'm just coming up with this off the top of my head. Maybe, obviously I'm not the central planner, so I won't, even I don't know all of the knock-on effects this will have. My claim is that nobody knows. But one possible one is game companies are like, hey, we're no longer allowed to have this clause where we're allowed to end this service at any time. But actually we're allowed to end the service if it's actually a rental agreement. So then suddenly every game where, you'd pay, $30 to have the crew, and then you have it for, however many years it was up, suddenly that becomes, hey, you got to pay $20 a month for the crew. And then everything becomes a subscription service with all the problems that you get with subscription services. And suddenly, it's like you look at your card and you're paying like a grand a month for all your Steam library. And you're like, what the hell? How did I get into this? We're in like cable TV. Well, cable TV, how streaming services became that. Suddenly gaming becomes also cable TV. And everything is cable TV. And everything is a subscription service. Like,
No, many people have brought that up. My counter to that is that's one where the market kind of adds some guardrails, because the games industry has already tried that before. And in the mid 2000s, there were a bunch of MMORPGs. They saw the success of EverQuest and later World of Warcraft, where it's like these games are like licenses to print money. It's like every few months, it's like we're selling the cost of a new game. It's like everybody was trying to get in on that. And what happened was, after not too long, almost all of them either went out of business or they switched to a different model of free to play. Because it turns out there's only so many people out there that do want to pay money every month for a game, because that's a psychological check on a lot of people. If even you could even be spending more money just buying just regular games where you pay for it and then you can run it indefinitely. It's yours. But from a psychological standpoint, it feels like you're getting something more out of it. Whereas if you're getting a reminder every month you have to pay for this game, then you're wondering, well, wait a minute, am I even getting my money's worth? Or it's like, geez, this is getting expensive. I can't keep up with this. And that's been shown multiple times. Like, we did this check we looked at about over 700 games. And like, we were examining, it was for different reasons, but we were looking at, like, okay, which ones died and stayed dead, which ones are at risk, which one got salvaged by the community or salvaged by developers. Out of that list, I think we found maybe 12 or 13 that were the subscription only ones. So this is already so profitable if you can pull it off. The problem is, a lot try to pull it off and they kind of choke each other out. So it's kind of only the old guard that have big empires like World of Warcraft or one of the Final Fantasy games that can kind of get away with it, because they have just this legacy fan base and have been entrenched in it. If they were all to try to, I guess here's another aspect to it. Even during its heyday in the mid 2000s, where they were all trying to get on that subscription aspect, there are far more games now that don't do that. You just pay once, or it's free, or you pay for a microtransaction. They don't tell you when it ends. than there were even proportionally during the MMO days, which suggests is that they're managing to kind of sustain this because of that. I would call it a psychological deception, but the kind of sneak this practice through. Whereas if they had to say, okay, you pay for this for like a year or 2 years, and after that you need to renew your fee, or you pay for it every month, I think that's not. I think it's going to choke out a lot more of these games that are getting killed. So it might not be 100% catch to it, but it would get a lot. And I guess there's two things I made notes on quick. You're talking about knock-on effects. Yeah, that is a risk. There probably are things I'm not foreseeing. I've tried to foresee a lot of them, though, on this particular issue. But I think that's going to be a weak argument coming from your camp when you're talking about abolishing intellectual property, because there is going to be way more knock-on effects from that are hard to foresee. And I guess for regulations, sometimes they work, and I wrote examples of a few of them, but one easy, it depends on what you're aiming for, too. We're just trying to aim for a lot less games being destroyed. And one example I make references to, because I think there's similar dynamics, not completely, are in the 60s with seatbelts. Not the seatbelt laws that you must wear them, but that regulations on manufacturers saying you need to include seatbelts so that if like a passenger wants to have one, they have that choice, for safety reasons. So I mean, I think people debating whether you should be required to wear or not, that's a separate issue. But just having that choice to have a seatbelt was pushed on companies. And that was enacted, I think, in '68. You go to a dealership pretty much anywhere now, you're going to have seatbelts included with the car. So that's a case where that particular regulation, I think, worked for its purpose. Now, you can argue that led to other things like maybe requiring airbags or going too far in other regulations. Yeah, but for the specific target it was at, that's one that worked. So.
Sure. So yeah, no, I think that these regulations, they can often achieve the scene side of it. They can achieve the immediate effect they were trying to get. Sometimes, they don't do that. They achieve the exact opposite of that. A lot of the times, in fact. But yeah, no, you can have a seatbelt regulation where you do achieve the goal of having every car has a seatbelt, or you do have the goal that no shop is allowed to serve any alcohol anymore. But the unseen effects, this is sorry, not Henry Hazlitt's, Bastiat's. Henry Hazlitt also talked about this. This is Economics in One Lesson, where it's all about the seen and the unseen. This is Bastiat's point of the seen and the unseen, where for any given interference in the economy, and this is the point, is that for abolishing IP, I don't get these unseen effects because I'm not interfering into the economy. I'm advocating we pull back from the economy. We have the government pull back and let the market take care of it. With these seen and the unseen, like, the old window analogy, where you break a window and the baker's like, what the heck? This kid just broke my window. And, an economist strolls along and goes, actually, this is better because now the window maker gets a job and the economy flourishes. But of course, what we don't see is that the baker now can't spend that money on some new shoes, right? So there's the seen and the unseen. So for my camp, because I'm not advocating destroying capital like the window, I'm advocating stopping destroying capital. I'm advocating that we don't have these monopoly grants where you go out and stamp out all the competition. I don't get these unseen effects. You only get these unseen effects when you have the government come in and be the central planner who decides how I can use my own damn property how I want. Like, that's when you get these unseen consequences.
I think you do get some unseen. Well, we were just talking about, like, hey, maybe if the transition's too fast, you get them forming up a new government, and who knows what that one looks like. I would call that an unforeseen effect or knock-on effect. Like, there's a chance it could happen, There's something else I was going to say. Oh, yeah, what you were talking about, like, with the break the window, and it's like, oh, that's good for the economy. Yeah, I think there's the broken windows theory, but I think the official term for that is perverse incentive, where you're promoting the exact opposite of what you want. You don't want everybody running around smashing windows because that help. I mean, you are if you're a window maker, but literally everyone else doesn't want that. So
Sure, and maybe if we had that society, and I came out and said, hey, I'm going to introduce bulletproof windows where nobody can smash it with rocks anymore, and somebody comes along with like, whoa, 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 this is going to ruin the window smasher industry. And what if people get so pissed off by this that they tear down, that they re-establish the old rule that we have window smashers again? It's like, yeah, that would be potentially something that would happen down the line. That's not really an unseen effect of me stopping the window smashing, is that people get so angry that they bring it back. That would be just another thing that happens later on, right?
yeah, I think this also ties in too with how desperate the people are trying to get the regulation are too, because like also you mentioned with regulations, another thing that can happen with regulations is sometimes they work a long time and then they get repealed or then they get undone. So it's like, well, they work for a while, or like I would argue there's an argument for like the EPA when that was formed. Shortly before it, the Cuyahoga River was catching on fire. So, people, I'm not denying there aren't knock-on consequences of the EPA. And actually, I would argue over time, there's been a lot of regulatory capture of it, where it's maybe not doing what it's supposed to in a lot of cases now. But at that moment, I could see people not caring, where they're thinking, okay, our rivers are on fire. We have to do something. If nobody else is stepping up, fine, let's push this agency. They're saying they'll clean it up, fine, let's clean it up. And I think there's a human psychology element to that, where the more desperate the person is on an issue, the more they are willing to risk these knock-on effects. Because they'll take the devil they don't know over the one they do. And obviously nowhere near as serious an issue as that, but for gaming, that's kind of where we are with wanting the games not destroyed. However we get there, it would have to be incredibly bad, and it's difficult for me to envision like how bad the proposed regulation would be for us not to want that. Though there are a few, we're trying to steer away from those.
So I would say this is a sort of incomplete history of the EPA. There's this great Murray Rothbard article on this, the Libertarian Manifesto on Pollution, where it used to be the case, long before the EPA, where if you had this little old lady, and this is referring to an actual court case, there was this little old lady, and she would hang her washing up. It used to be wet and clean. She'd go inside for a few hours, come out, and it would be dry and dirty. Because there'd be a factory down the road, and it was pumping out all this soot, and it would dirty up her clothes as they were drying. But what this little old lady did is she just took them to court, and she got an injunction against them, so they were no longer able to pollute. They had to put these special filters in, or use a different type of coal that didn't pollute, didn't put off all this soot, and then they also had to pay her back. She got money out of it because they dirtied all her clothes. They ruined her clothes. That's how it used to be. But then the US got this certain idea in the progressive era. They were like, hey, the US, we want to be the best. Who's the best right now? It's the British Empire. How do we be better than the British Empire? Well, we got to have upper manufacturing. So when more little old ladies would come to the court, they would say, little old lady, yes, they dirtied your shirt. But we have higher and bigger goals right now. We're trying to up manufacturing. So, go kick rocks. And then suddenly, the factories, they no longer bothered installing these filters. They no longer bothered stopping pollution. And then so you got a whole bunch of pollution coming out. And then they tried to fix this government problem with a government solution, which was the EPA. And the carryover from this is how you can tell sort of this history is the EPA gives out pollution licenses that if they're polluting below a certain level, you can't sue them for that pollution because it's within their license. They are allowed to pollute that much. So it is central planning to try and fix a problem which is caused by central planning. It's central planning all the way down, right?
Well, maybe. Actually, I'm not sure on this, but I know during that era, party bosses were a real thing. And I'm wondering, where did the motivation for the politicians who did pass that law saying, oh, we need to be bigger and better than the British Empire come from? Because this is a problem I don't have a good answer to. It's one I've sort of mulled in my head. Well, it seems like you'll have these power vacuums where, like, okay, you talk about the lady, suing them over, polluting, and then she won. Well, the polluters are going to notice that, and they're going to think, well, wait a minute, we can't have all these people coming after us when we're trying to make our business, smelting steel or something like that. So maybe we can talk to the politicians to try to get things in our favor. And you might say, okay, well, let's get rid of the politicians. Well, then I think what would happen is you might say, okay, well, instead of the politicians, why don't we just pay, we have lots of money from our industry. Why don't we just hire some thugs and just start, next time something like this, like a mafia structure, it's like, okay, were you going to go to court? Well, yeah, well, let's see what happens to you or your family or something. And then everybody else can see what happened to them next time you try to come against us. And the question, I'm not expecting you to answer this. I don't have an answer for this. Is it seems like every institution or organization or just kind of anything with lots of power, it just seems to kind of corrupt over time. Like almost like that's part of, I don't think that's part of the individual human condition, but I think collectively that seems to be a part of it. And I don't know, I think you could have utopia and then within a couple generations, it's going to be corrupted somehow. And like, I don't have an answer to that. That's something I've tried to, contemplate before. And it's a riddle, I guess.
Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. I'm here. I've got the answer. I've got the answer. So,
okay.
The base level answer is you want to have a philosophy of the society where they're loving freedom. They love freedom. So, this factory, they couldn't hire enough thugs to overtake the billions of people around them. Like, they're not going to be able to do that. They just can't overpower people. And this is the case with the government right now. The government can't literally overpower with their force everybody in the United States. They could not do that. If everybody in the United States wanted President Trump out, he'd be out today, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's sort of the base level answer. The more fleshed out answer is there's this book by Austrian economist Hans-Hermann Hoppe called The Private Production of Defense. So in this book, he sort of argues, like he builds up from the ground. Okay, so we're in this free market. Okay, but you might have somebody aggressing against you. You might have somebody trying to like shoot you or whatever. Okay, this is a certain type of risk. How do we deal with risk on the market? Well, sometimes you can deal with it through insurance, sometimes you can't. And he analyzes it and he goes, okay, well, this is actually an insurable risk. So he says, basically, his argument is that on the free market, you would tend to get these insurance agencies. Because insurance agencies, they're a great candidate for this. They're a great candidate for protecting your rights. Because they have massive capital holdings spread across the entire globe, so they can really protect you against anybody, even states. They could protect you against states if they were allowed to flourish. So if this insurance agency in this hypothetical Ancapistan, or whatever you want to call it, if this factory tried to hire thugs to beat up people, very quickly they're going to run into all these massive insurance agencies who are like, hey, we're going to send a Harrier jet in and blow up your factory if you don't cut this out now, right? Or we're going to send in some commandos and we're going to, take your CEO and bring him to court, right? They're not going to be able to hire enough thugs to stop this if the society is positioned such that they support these insurance agencies and pretty much everybody is a member of one, right?
Well, to me, that's just kind of shifting the target, because I would think, okay, I don't need to hire all these thugs if I, like, let's say I'm just a bad actor and I just want more power. I think, well, I don't need to hire all these thugs now necessarily. I need to infiltrate the insurance agencies. I would say, like, okay, and let's say the guy at the top, he's complete Boy Scout, like he's incorruptible. It's like, okay, well, then I just need to focus my thugs on that guy, or start winning favors through his board beneath him so that they eventually want to vote him out and then get one of our guys in there, and then he's going to cut me favors. See, I think it's a similar dynamic for kind of corrupting that as you would have for like corrupting government. Or again, this isn't a fair question I'm asking you because like I can't think of the answer like under any system.
I mean, don't worry. I mean, I'm the anarchist here. It's perfectly legitimate for you to say, like, hey, answer me these questions three. How are you going to deal with it?
I don't have it either.
Because I am coming into this with like, hey, I think that your solution doesn't work. I think that my solution is best. So my answer to the like, in this hypothetical society where it's pretty much everybody is freedom loving and they have these insurance agencies, if somebody were, you had like an evil businessman, like a Lex Luthor comes in and he's like, hey, I want to take over that insurance agency to start like, kicking puppies or whatever. And nobody wants this, but he's like, hey, I'm going to, intimidate the board and get the CEO ousted and put me in charge. Well, I mean, very quickly, like these insurance agencies, they have to be able to publicly show to people that they're able to enforce their rights, that they're able to protect these people. If you see this like coup going on in your insurance agency, you're going to go, I'm just going to go to the other insurance agency. I'm just going to buy from somebody else. And then they wouldn't be able to maintain any of their customers if people weren't confident that these people are rights respecting and going to be able to enforce their rights. Like that's the entire business model of these firms.
Well, I think we might be going in circles a bit, but I wouldn't underestimate any large organization being corruptible. Is kind of how I look at it. But if there's small ones, then I also think you're going to have a merging of power somewhere, either through an insurance agency, a company, a government. So that's what I'm saying. That this is like a human condition problem. I don't know, but let's say, okay, I guess where do you want to go now? I'm not sure. I think I got some of the points I wanted to hit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we could just go over. I don't know if we've really hit heavily on like, this is a government action. I mean, whichever way you slice it, it is petitioning the EU to do something about it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how can you, as like or somebody else in Stop Killing Games, how is it able to be justified that the EU comes in and, basically tells people how they're allowed to use their property?
Well, okay, okay, well, I guess I explained the earlier version is they might already be breaking the law. And so we didn't just do the initiative. We also did the consumer protection agencies. The initiative is just us going overkill because we're in this place or I was in this place where we see this as like, okay, this is our only chance to stop it. If we don't do it now, like we're screwed. Like this is just going to get worse and worse. And this practice is never going to end. So you're asking well, I'm kind of confused too, because aren't you saying that this property is kind of illegitimate in the first place because it's intellectual property?
Okay, so yeah, no, I do realize I should be a lot more clear here. So
Okay.
I'm a natural law theorist. When I'm talking about like people having property rights, I think that's irrespective of the government at all. I think that you already have those property rights in nature, and then the government comes in and they're basically a criminal organization. So IP, I don't even call that a property right. I don't think that is a real property right. I think it's a coercively enforced negative easement. It's telling other people how they're allowed to use their property. And I think this is illegitimate. I think it's a type of monopoly grant, basically. So yeah, no, it's, yeah, given natural rights, how do you justify, maybe you reject natural rights or whatever, but my question would be, for the natural rights viewer, the person who believes in natural rights, how would you convince them or justify to them, you don't have to convince them, whatever, but how would you justify that the EU should come in and tell people how they're allowed to use their property?
I may not have a great answer for that because I tend to look more at results rather than what method gets us there. So it's I guess what I was thinking for the intellectual property rights, it sounds like that's not even respected on your end, so we wouldn't have to worry about that. So I guess you'd be asking, why should they be compelled to make this game workable in some fashion on the way out because they're in possession of that code and they decide, well, I don't want to share that? Is that?
Yeah, like, fundamentally, they own like the hard drives and the computers, and they're the ones like paying their developers. So it's entirely up to that the CEO of that company or whatever to say, no, developers, I'm your boss. I don't want you to um, make it such that it's got this end of life plan in place. And I think that's the CEO's right, his company, right? So I mean, why is the EU allowed to come in and say, no, Mr. CEO, we're the central planners, and we're going to tell you how to run your company?
Well, that CEO has to, if, well, they wouldn't technically, they just wouldn't be allowed to sell in the EU market if they didn't want to comply with that. But you feel like that's illegitimate authority in the first place. So I guess you kind of have to go with the populist argument then, which again, it may not resonate with the natural thing. Like, let's say yeah, here's another element to this. I think this is right, and I'm pushing for like this outcome. But if everyone was against it, I would think, okay, well, I'm the weirdo then. I guess this isn't happening. I just have to deal with this system I'm in. Whereas if just a lot of people, what I find is the more, it's not 100. I think when people have good information, the majority of people make good decisions. But I also think that process is easily hijacked. And we might have a scenario where, okay, you can argue this is infringing upon the CEO's rights and he wants to do it this way. But let's say the people working for him don't really want that, but they want to keep their jobs. That's the only reason they're going along with it. And then all the customers don't want that. And then the lawmakers also don't want that, but you could argue they're illegitimate. So it's almost like we're respecting the rights of this one person in a way that affects like millions of people in a way that everybody hates this. And we're just trying to get some provision here. Now, if you're going to be like an absolutist on the natural rights, you're right. That's probably not going to be a compelling argument. But I feel like in my opinion, the better idea of something is when there is information, good information on it, because lots of people can be misled on things for sure. I think you tend to end up with better decisions, but
So there's this good book, great book, I should say, by Bryan Caplan, another economist, called "The Myth of the Rational Voter," where he basically goes over like, because there is this sort of claim that like, well, the voter he's well informed, he's looking to really get the best vote out there, but that actually isn't the case. Pretty much everybody doesn't understand even basic economics, and they don't understand the basics of what their policies they're advocating are going to end up with. Like, you know, you're clearly a smart guy. Most people have not done any sort of thinking through what these things will do. Like, not even the first step of thinking through what it would do. And you've clearly gone way beyond that. So I would reject the claim that, like, you know, when people have good information, they will make the right choices. I reject that that's a good calculus to go, hey, this must be broadly good. Because, I mean, you know, not a lot of people agree with something. That's based on their philosophy. And the philosophy of the day can be drastically incorrect. I would contend that the philosophy of the day right now is indeed drastically incorrect. Basically, everybody is in favor of horrendous things. Most people, if you ask them, like, just you know, go down the list of the philosophy 101 questions, they'll get 99 out of 100 of them wrong. So, and it gets even worse when you get up into the ethics. They will be perfectly fine with people tearing you apart, limb from limb, because like you had a bad opinion or whatever, or you didn't give enough money away to charity. Like, people are they are evil at their core, I think.
well, actually, I don't think people are evil at their core. I think most people just want to go with the flow. And I think people can be kind of steered in directions by people who have a lot more influence. But you're right. That's probably not the best way to explain. I guess you're right. There are holes in that line of reasoning. I was using. I guess what I would say is you're right on those examples that you brought up. But I was thinking people can understand, hey, I paid for this and now it's being destroyed. I want this to change. Or like I mentioned with the EPA, hey, the river's on fire. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but it's not this. So I think you have to, you need to have a channel for this in order, if you want to have a good outcome from it. And if there's not a good one being created, then it can kind of smash in different directions. And you could argue that's what I'm doing. I think this particular direction I'm advocating for as minimal risk for bad outcomes for the realm that it occupies. But no, you're right. It's not a foolproof thing.
Sure, and I mean, I completely agree. Like, the base level is, hey, there's this problem. Like, the rivers are burning, or I paid for this game a month ago and now I can't play it anymore. These are indeed real problems. And that's sort of like why I'm approaching this in the way I am. Like, I agree, you have to acknowledge the problem. But then what you do after that is you say, well, what is the actual, first of all, what's the cause of this problem? So, i.e., what is the nature of this problem? What's making this thing happen? And the answer is government intervention. So, through that lens, it becomes a lot harder to say, well, the solution is more government intervention. And on the base level, on the ethical level, like, it is just immoral. It violates people's rights to have the EU come in and say that that I have to use my property in a certain way if I run a games company. Like, and if that claim that the EU is allowed to do this, if that's unjustified, then the whole Stop Killing Games initiative rests on an unjustified claim. And that claim would have to be justified for this proposal to make any sort of sense, philosophically.
Well, it's okay. I wrote down a couple of things, and one of my notes was blundering around. Okay, so you're claiming this is like unjust because we're dictating how they use their property. We're actually not. We're dictating how they sell it to people within this territory. So, like the initiative, for example, it would impact nothing. It would do nothing if the game is free, like completely free. They make it, okay, well then there's no commerce being involved. So you could argue that, okay, we're intruding upon this person's rights to say, like, no, you must follow these guidelines, but they're also entering in sort of an arena of other people's rights as consumers. We're saying, well, selling in this market, these are kind of the known laws. I mean, I guess you could argue that there shouldn't be the laws and the consumers would have to work this out individually with each company, but I think they'll have a very large power imbalance in that case. And however, this probably isn't good enough, but to throw a bone to the natural rights crowd, I never still don't want to do any of this. And I kept hoping the industry would solve itself on this issue. I just didn't want the games destroyed. If they had sort of caught themselves and realized, oh, well, this is kind of bad practice, we shouldn't do this, or we should just cut this back like 90% at least, I never would have done any of this. I'm not seeking government intervention. I'm kind of seeking, like, how do we stop this problem? And that's kind of where I'm coming from. Going back to the morality of it, again, it's this might just come down to like a values clash, but it's on a very small level, but I see kind of destroying art or creative works in general that people want to save, that, this has like innate value to them, like innate aesthetic value to them. Others are trying to stop that. I kind of see that immoral to a small degree. I mean, obviously not compared to many other serious things. So then it's kind of like, well, which is more moral? Like not destroying this creative work that the many people valued and they gave money for, and they want to preserve it because they think this is valuable, not just to them maybe, but even for people of the future to experience, versus the person running this that probably doesn't care too much about this thing that they've helped invest to put out, because they're just trying to make money out of this. For them, usually it's more just product. And like, it could be toothpaste, it could be insurance, it doesn't matter. And because it's slightly more economical, at least in the well, actually that's even debatable, but for sure in the short term, it's more economical to do it this way rather than do it this way that, like, the masses are screaming to do it this way. We're going to do it this way that pisses everybody off. And it's like, you sort of start clashing, and it's like, well, which is the higher good, that sort of thing.
Sure. So, I mean, I would say the higher good is the one which doesn't violate anybody's rights. Even if somebody's doing something untoward, and I agree they're doing something untoward here, and I think they're able to get away with doing this untoward thing because they have this monopoly grant, which also violates people's rights, by the way. I'm against that. I would say that the further violation of rights, that's the bad thing. So we need to just keep peeling away these violations of rights, even if, in the perfectly rights-respecting society, I might come up to you and say, hey, you're a real nincompoop, and I hate you. And that might hurt your feelings, and it might be really mean of me to say that. But ultimately, I should be allowed to do mean things, so long as I'm not violating rights. It is the greater evil to then come in and have the government say, no, that's hateful speech, so we're going to lock you up in a cage for 20 years, right? That would be the greater evil there. Because ultimately, it doesn't violate anybody's rights to make a game and then just pull the rug underneath for people and say, tee-hee, just kidding. Like that, it's bad. You shouldn't do that. But it doesn't violate rights to do that. So yeah, ultimately, it's just up to, like, bringing it to the consumer side and saying, hey, if you want to do something about this, then don't buy games from those people or pirate those games, right? I'm a big advocacy of piracy. I think if a games company is engaged in these bad practices, you should go and pirate their games. I want to emphasize, like, I think this still is the EU dictating how people are allowed to use their property, because that's sort of what I'm resting my claim on here. It's only in this one territory, and yeah, it's only if they're selling it, but ultimately, both buyer and seller agree to certain terms, and the seller wants to sell it to them, and then the EU says, no, you're not allowed to sell it unless you've got an end-of-life plan. Would be the ideal world from Stop Killing Games. But that's telling them that they're not allowed to sell, so it violates both their rights and the consumer's rights for the EU to come and do this, and that is the greater evil.
Well, you say it tells them they can't sell. No, they can sell. It's just that their conditions, like, even in a market, let's say an anarchy-ish market, let's say you're selling guns and you just load all of your shotguns and just they're on a hair trigger, they're ready to go. Now, you start off doing that, people inspect it, it's fine. But then let's say a kid accidentally touches it, and then bam, it just shoots some customers. Well, then, even if there's no government, or just people might kind of collectively decide, hey, let's not keep the guns loaded that you're selling to people in the market. And it can kind of form some rules just because a problem emerged from not having some of the rules. But no, you said several things I wanted to respond to. When you talk about, like, the right to call people a nincompoop or something, I think you have a point there, but I also think that's not a stable element if it ignores human psychology too much. Because say I go into a biker bar, and let's say I call them meaner things, and the residents there, the nincompoops. You can argue that they don't have the right to grab me and drag me across the counter and throw me out of there. But, basic common sense and rationality and just understanding of human psychology says I should maybe expect that if I go in and start trash talking a bunch of bikers in a biker bar. So it's like you might be in the right, but then in some situations that kind of ignores basic human psychology. And that might not be the most stable thing to do. And you mentioned piracy. The overwhelming majority of the games that would be most targeted by this have never been pirated, and many of them are effectively impossible to be pirated, unless you did have those geniuses working on it for years trying to crack it, that sort of thing, or reverse engineer it. And I guess the final, okay, no, sorry, two more things. You mentioned violating rights. Well, you can argue that the way the seller right now is conducting themselves violates their consumer rights. But you're probably referring to natural rights, and you could argue that the consumer rights are founded on, illegitimate means, so that wouldn't have any weight with you. But I guess the other thing that's against the copyright just being the main problem of this, because again, I'm trying to figure out how do we stop destroying the games. This emerged not from, well, you can maybe argue it does if it goes back far enough, but I think it's a harder argument. What's happening now, to the best of my knowledge, did not emerge from government, because this practice never even existed until about 2004. Until before that point, I want to say literally every video game that was, sold or given a subscription, either you got to keep it and it could work indefinitely, or they told you exactly when it ended, your access to it. And the laws didn't change regarding games from 2004 that I'm aware of. I mean, maybe a few tertiary ones affected things like later on, but this kind of emerged organically under the current system. I mean, I guess you could argue the system itself made this inevitable, but I mean, it made it decades before this happened. So I think it gets blurrier where the fault comes in.
Sure. So, I mean, there were a few things there. I do want to just pick up real quick, because this was a massive, you brought up this biker bar example, and this is actually an example I use in my course on libertarian ethics and libertarian legal theory, that in my view, actually, if you go into like some sort of seedy biker bar and you go up to the biggest, toughest guy in there who looks real mean, he's got all these face tattoos, and you say, hey, I fucked your mother last night, that you're actually consenting to get into a fight. Because what you're saying there, you're not just saying that you had sexual intercourse with his mother. You're saying, hey, mister, I want to have a fight with you. That's what you're saying. That's the language of the biker bar. And everybody understands this. It's like how, I've got a path up to my front door where there's a mailbox. I'm not using any words. I don't have a big sign up which says, hey, mailman, come up this way. I'm consenting to you using this path to walk to my mailbox. But I'm very clearly communicating that, hey, you're allowed to walk up this path to deliver mail here. So that's mostly like a sort of an aside. Moreover, like the main point is that, yeah, there should be conditions, there should be rules surrounding selling, but those rules should be based on the actual natural rights of people. They shouldn't abrogate, they shouldn't violate those natural rights. So if you have basically these landmine shotguns where they'll go off in a second, like if you just bump into them, I think those are basically landmines. That's illegitimate. You're not allowed to have that. It's too dangerous, right? Unless you have like, hey, come in here to the shotgun landmine hallway and see if you can get through it alive. Obviously, if you make it clear, then it's fine. But if it's not clear, then it's not fine. So those conditions, they should be contractual and based on natural law contracts, the title transfer theory of contract. They should be based on that, and like they shouldn't violate rights. But here with the EU, we've got a situation where it's a big government entity coming in and saying, hey, I know all of you guys want to operate in this way, but we don't like that. And so it's like that meme of like, I consent, and then Jesus is on the side saying, I don't. Isn't there someone you've got to ask? It's like the EU just comes in and says, no, you're not allowed to consent to that, Mr. and Missy. So we're going to come in here, and if you try to consent to that, if you try to do this trade anyway, we're going to lock you in a cage for 20 years. Like, that is the real problem here, is that these rules are illegitimate. They're bad, non-consensual rules.
Yeah, though you made an interesting point that occurred to me. Like, okay, so I actually hadn't heard that before, that you're kind of consenting by engaging in that, but that also strikes me, in many cases it'll be more clear, but a subjective thing where, you know, you could say the same insult to another person, they're just gonna insult you back, but you go to the biker bar, he's gonna pound your face in. Or just there can be a subjective interpretation as like, okay, well, what's constituting aggression or not, and what's just like what you're expecting, like a civil disagreement with the language you're using, and that made me think. Well, again, I keep referring back to like human psychology comes into a part of it. I don't know how that factors into natural law actually, but like you were mentioning that you would pirate these games if like they're just shutting you out from it because you feel justified. Well, I would think in you can make the argument that by shutting out these games, that's they're consenting to an act of aggression in the sense that they're challenging you to pirate the games because they know you want to play it, but they're not allowing you to. And I would think, well, okay, if the company is doing this thing that we hate, you know, destroying the games, because that they can't know that that's not going to upset customers. Like that's, you know, they can't be like completely ignorant of that. Well, then couldn't the EU intervention be seen as them consenting to an act of aggression coming from our end, and the EU represents that aggression because we don't have other means. So that this is our way of punching back against that practice that we feel kind of they started, because this practice didn't used to exist. It was kind of imposed on the customers. And we go back to the creative monopoly again. You know, you could argue, oh, well, then just don't buy it. Well, you know, it's a monopoly. Each game is a unique experience, and gamers have proven they can do many things, but not play games they're not good at. Like I've never put it like this. I've never known a game that's enjoyable to play that's had a successful boycott. Like you can almost monitor gaming habits, sometimes like drug users, for how like encaptured they are in the market for that sort of thing.
So I will say, I think this is another point where I have to clarify the language I'm using, because I mean, you know, I'm very used to these like sort of debates with like philosophy people who are like, you know, I can just like steamroll blah 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 blah. But yeah, no, I'm using somewhat idiosyncratic terminology here. So when I'm talking about an aggression, I'm using that in a very particular way, which I didn't explain. So when I'm saying that something is an aggression, and this is particularly to you, where you were saying that, well, maybe they're killing the game and that's the aggression, and then when this EU comes in, that's the second aggression to try and stop the first one. So when I say an aggression, I mean that it's an initiation of conflict. So what I mean by this is, you know, you can imagine, you know, Robinson Crusoe and Friday are on the desert island. Crusoe, he picked up a stick from nature, and then Friday comes along later and he tries to take that stick from Crusoe. Crusoe wants to use that stick to spearfish with, and Friday wants to use it to stoke his fire. These are two different actions that could take place, but they are mutually exclusive. That is, Crusoe can't spearfish at the same time that Friday stokes his fire. So this is what is described as a conflict in libertarian theory. An aggression is the initiation of conflict. So Friday has initiated this conflict. So, precisely speaking, when a games company just makes a game without an end-of-life plan and says, no, we're turning off the server today, we're clicking the off switch, and, you know, good luck. that is not an aggression, at least not in the base case. You know, it might be if they said, hey, transfer to us $20 and you're guaranteed you'll be able to play this for 20 months. And then they didn't keep that promise, that contract, then that would be an aggression. They've defrauded that person. But in the base case of just killing a game, it's not an aggression. So I just want to clarify that.
Well, okay, well, I'm confused then, because you said insulting the biker is an aggression. You said that, right? Or did I miss?
If I did say that, then I was making a huge mistake, because I would never describe it in that way.
Okay, well then I got lost then. I guess people can check the footage later to see who said what. Okay, well, yeah, that would change things then. So, okay, so the aggression is like you have to. Yeah, okay, that got me thrown off. But no, you said going into the biker bar and pissing the people off was an aggression. Or you said something like that. What could you clarify what you meant? Or
so if you went into the biker bar and you went up to the biggest, toughest guy in there, and you said, "Hey, I had sex with your mother last night. I fucked your mom," right? That's not actually saying I fucked your mom. That's it's not literally saying that he had sexual intercourse with your mother. It's saying, hey, good gentleman, I want to have a fight with you right now. Are you amicable?
Okay, well then, if a game maker is doing this action that they know it's going to piss off their customers, how is that different?
So it's different
like
because
they know it. Like they know this. Like, you know,
it's different because it's the justifiable response to it's not just that you pissed off the biker. It's that you're actually communicating. It's understood by everybody in that environment that when you go up to a big tough guy and say, hey, I fucked your mom, that you want to have a fight with him. It's equivalent to saying, it's like the old story of the king. So there was this English king, and this priest, or this bishop or whatever, was pissing him off. He was very angry with this bishop, and he had his court with all his knights. He called up his court. He said, "Ugh, won't someone rid me of this turbulent priest?" Now, he's not just saying, hypothetically, won't somebody get rid of this guy? He's clearly saying, hey, you knights who are employed by me, go and kill this guy. And, you know, they did go off and kill the guy. And so it's about communicating a double meaning, where you're not literally communicating the meaning of those words. Where, you know, if you were to read it in a court's transcript, you're like, well, he just said he had sex with his mother. Like, that person's actually saying, hey, I want to have a fight with you right now. I'm consenting to have a fight with you right now. Whereas the game maker isn't saying by killing off the game. They're not saying, hey, I want you guys to regulate me right now. Like, it's not some like BDSM contract between the consumers and the company.
Yeah. It still seems so subjective for how that's interpreted, though, because, yeah, okay, so they have to be like challenging the. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is getting hazy, but
well,
I mean, when
it's based on social norms, it's like the norm of where I've got a path.
Well, that just seems to amplify it then, because again, this practice didn't used to exist. From the gamer's perspective, as somebody who's been around a while, they broke the norm, the industry, and it's like now we're just finally, like I almost look at this like, you know. Like this is just taking 20 years for us to come over here to do this fight, you know. But you're saying because they didn't want the fight, then it wasn't an act of aggression? Is that the argument? Or
so my point would be that a CEO saying, hey, let's stop supporting this game. I don't think that and the burden of proof would be on you guys to show that this actually communicates. What he actually means by this is that he wants EU regulation to force him to make an end-of-life plan. That's going to be a very hard case to make. But even if you could make that case for that particular CEO, you can't make it for all the CEOs who are yet to kill a game. And there might be CEOs out there who are yet to kill a game, and they're still going to be subject to that regulation. So it would be like if I went up to a biker and he said, "Hey, every ginger person wants to have a fight with you," and then he's went around punching all the ginger people. Like, I can't consent on behalf of all the ginger people. Like, so even then, this one CEO, he couldn't communicate on behalf of all the other companies.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, I lost my train of thought again. That's why I need to keep notes. Okay, so for the CEO, he's not. I think that this actually does happen a lot in business where they try to test limits of what they can get away with if there's a new practice that is profitable. So let's say that one of those first CEOs are saying, okay, well, we're going to, well, one of the earliest I know of was EA, Electronic Arts. They're, one of the first shutdowns I know of that wasn't on these terms was a game called Battleforge. And they sold that as, regular product, but it did have these new terms where you had to connect to the server. And I think at the time there was some unknown uncertainty. It's like, well, okay, they haven't said what they're going to do, but they'll probably have some end of life patch at the end of this because some other companies have done that before. And then once they pull the rug out, I think you could argue at that moment they were kind of testing, like, okay, well, are we gonna get in trouble for this? Or get a slap on the wrist, or are gamers just gonna take it? And they probably were prepared that early on for some possible regulation backlash, but they played the odds and thought, this isn't gonna piss off enough people. I bet we can get away with it. And then that pattern kind of continued. Because again, this practice did not used to exist that you just take away the game and not tell them when, even though you paid up front for it. But, and I apologize that we're getting in circles, but it just,
sure.
I don't know. I think there's some ambiguity there. Yeah.
Sure. So in the case of the biker bar, it is specifically about what some particular individual is communicating to some other particular individual. Whereas in the case of these companies where they're just sunsetting a game without an end-of-life plan, that's not really a particular individual communicating something to some other particular individual, which can then actually has a double meaning. There is no double meaning there. It might be bad that they did it. It might be wrong of them to do that. But there isn't a double meaning to, ask any of these CEOs, hey, be explicit here. When you said that, when you ordered your employees to kill off the crew or whatever, did you actually mean that you want the EU to come in and force you to make an end-of-life plan for the crew? Like, they'd be like, no, of course not.
Well, I think that might be. I think that just more like that they bit off more than they can chew, rather like the intensity. Like if they would probably be prepared for some bad press, or maybe one politician wagging their finger. Like if you go in and you're expecting a slap fight and the guy pulls out a knife on you, you could argue that's not what you consented to, but you're kind of riding the line there. And I guess to emphasize one point, that the double meaning, I think the double meaning is, hey, we want to change the terms of what it means when you buy a game, so we have just no responsibility to you. I think that's kind of the double meaning there, because yeah, companies ended support for games all the time prior to something like Battleforge or whatever the first one that fits this model was. But that never used to mean you never get to run the game again, or you weren't told up front about it. And that's where that meaning changed. That like, okay, we're doing this thing we've done hundreds of times before, but this time it means something different. And I think that probably was them testing the waters. Is like, okay, well, can we get away with this? And can we just change the dynamics of how the customer-buyer relationship works? And okay, if we can't, then we'll probably get a slap on the wrist fine, and then we won't do that again, or we'll get a lot of PR backlash. So yeah, they may have expected a slap fight, but not a knife fight, and.
Well, I suppose, I wonder if you'd be copacetic towards a sort of solution which says like, hey, they've just got to be really explicit with the terms they're setting. They've got to be really explicit and say, up front, like on the Steam store page, they could like scan the terms and conditions or whatever, like, and just be like, hey, this company, they're able to revoke your access to this game at any time. Like, would you be okay with that type of solution? Because, I mean, that could be done, by like a browser extension or something,
Well, it already is. That's already been the case. I mean, you could argue, oh, it's not visible enough, but no. I mean, okay. Here, my view on it is, I want as few games and creative works to be destroyed as possible within what the masses decide are reasonable rules, I guess. So if it is going like so far that this is just causing hell for tons of companies, and now we're getting like a tenth of the games that we did or less, or this covers other knock-on effects I didn't foresee, and then it's causing millions of people to lose their jobs over this to get that last 10% of games saved or something. It's like, it's kind of a spectrum for me, where of course I want 100%, but I'm gonna have to compromise with reality and what makes the most sense for the most people, I guess.
I mean, I will say, like, if this does turn out monstrously bad and there's like all these crazy unforeseen effects, it'll be, the governments, they love, if they get that extra little bit of power, they love holding on to that power. I don't think that, I think you might need like a 10 times bigger movement to revoke the regulation than to get it in.
Yeah, well, like that kind of goes back to, put like this: the games industry can absolutely get worse, but I don't think we could really get on that much worse a trajectory. An example I'd like to bring up. Yeah, I'm sure you'll love this. Are you familiar with the original Xbox One reveal, like the terms it was going to have? If not, I'd love to tell you about it.
I'm not, no.
Okay, the original one, before they walked some of this back, was that it was unclear if every single game you bought for it was going to be rendered unusable once they ended support. You had to, it wasn't going to allow used games, which is that's a more debatable topic in my eyes, but some people are really very much against that. You had to dial in every 24 hours to the publisher, or else it would stop working. So even games that you hadn't bought, they would all just be bricked until you dial in. And it had a mandatory surveillance device, which could track your biometrics, like your body temperature, like your breathing, maybe your heart rate. I'm not sure.
I did hear about the Kinect being like used by the NSA.
Too. Yeah, like I think there were some reports that saying that you might be able to use the right software to like even see through clothes or something based on thermal things, and that all got uploaded. And so I feel like that's the trajectory. I feel like the industry tipped their hand when that happened. Now there was a backlash because there was competition for it at the time, but the competitors have been kind of inching towards that direction also. So I feel like that's where the industry wants to take us. And so I'm thinking, okay, you're going to have to work really hard to convince me that the unforeseen consequences of what we're pushing is worse than that trajectory. And so that kind of puts us in a position where it's like, man, at this point we're willing to gamble with the devil we don't know than the devil we do, because man, that what we know is pretty bad.
No, because I mean, ultimately, this has been the devil, the whole time. He's just been putting on different clothes. They say about the devil, he can appear in all sorts of different forms. This has all been the government the whole time. The whole reason the industry has been able to be moving towards these horrible directions is because they had government protection on their IPs. The whole reason why why Microsoft was wanting to make the Kinect into like a surveillance device is because, as Edward Snowden told us, the NSA told them to. They said, hey, put a back door in here. We want a surveillance device in every home, right? It's all government. Every single time, it's been that the whole time. So it's not moving away from the devil to the devil you don't. It's the same devil the whole time. He's going, yes, give me more power.
Well, I guess my counter to that is this devil was certainly fooled me for 20 or 30 years that this can kind of work on the trajectory we were on, So I guess even if you're right, it made a very compelling case that like it doesn't, we don't have to be destroying things wholesale the way we are. And even the ones that do get destroyed, there's a lot of market forces that kind of keep it contained more. And just now it just feels like it's on a slope where it's going to run away. And I don't know, I guess I'm just not seeing, well, one, there's the practical element. Like, let's say the intellectual property is the whole game, as you say. To me, it's not obvious how we get there even in my lifetime. Whereas I feel like we're on the cusp of starting the process where I'm going to live to see the fruits of however this emerges, for better or worse, because man, I could be enemy number one if this goes out badly for a lot of gamers. But there's that element of it. And then, I don't know, it's not obvious to me that for sure what you're advocating for would solve some problems. Like, again, in your previous video, like about Stop Killing Games, I had no disagreements with pretty much anything you were saying on copyright and how it affects games, except for that one part of that's the only obstacle. I think it's the number 2 obstacle. But, yeah, okay, so go ahead. I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is just the main point. That I think the movement, like, it could achieve something great here, which is that gamers are getting rightfully pissed off that this thing keeps happening. But the correct way to approach that is to attack the cause of it rather than exacerbating that cause. You should kill the devil. You shouldn't make him stronger, because I think it is the same devil all along. I don't know how much. I've at least run out of notes.
No, I get where you're coming from. It's just not obvious to me that like that's the source, because here's a counter argument I'll give. You're familiar with what abandonware is?
Yeah.
It's basically, it's a game that's no longer being sold, and the company, whoever holds the rights to it, don't really care. And the way it works is, enthusiasts will put a copy of it up online and kind of see what happens. And if they don't get a takedown request, it just kind of stays up there. And a lot of times these rights, half the time the owners don't even know they have them. Sometimes it ends up in insurance companies or banks or that own the rights. Like, what? We own the rights to a game? Because and that process has saved thousands of games. Like, just, I think there was a study that showed that only 89% of games are no longer commercially being able to be bought. But there's this kind of underground preservation of it through abandonware. And so this is all stuff that's abandonware is not a legal term. Like, under the law, this is piracy of games that just kind of nobody's caring to exercise their intellectual property rights over. So that's an area where the copyright, there's some friction there. I'm not saying it's clean, but that's kind of similar to what you're describing, where the intellectual property laws aren't what's getting in the way there for the most part, because nobody cares, or the people who own the rights don't care about it. So it kind of free flows. But the games we're just targeting over and over again, it's because vital portions of them are being withheld, and that's something that's a choice from the business end of things. That's not the copyright in most cases. It's not the copyright that's saying, oh, well, we would release it, but the government's protecting us on this. It's like, no, we're just not releasing it. I mean, the analogy, I was trying to think of an analogy for this, and it'd be like, if I sold you something, then I put it in a safe, then I fill that with concrete, and then I dump it in the ocean somewhere, and I don't tell you where it is. It's like, okay, fine, you're free to go pick it up. It's like, well, maybe you never find it. So it's not so that's what makes me think it's more this particular business practice that's kind of leading to more of the games killed rather than just the copyright. Because if it was just the copyright, then all this abandonware would just be completely inaccessible, because the government would be cracking down so hard that you could just never get your hands on it, that sort of thing.
I mean, okay, maybe I'm just completely wrong here. made an abandonware where they're no longer, because it's not the government comes in and says, hey, you're violating a copyright, so we're going to crack down on that. It's the copyright holder who says, we're going to crack down on that. So surely abandonware, the success of that, the brilliance of that, is showing that, hey, when a copyright holder, when a patent holder, when they give up on enforcing it, then it flourishes and suddenly we get all this preservation. Doesn't that just reinforce my argument that, hey, it's the intellectual monopoly in the first place is the problem?
I agree with you when the community is able to, kind of preserve it and, let it flourish. No, I agree completely with that. I was talking earlier how I would love it if this stuff could enter public domain after they're done selling it or supporting it, that sort of thing. But the reason all this stuff has worked is because they were getting the full game and they weren't just pulling out this just essential code that takes years to kind of work backwards on to, bring it to life, that sort of thing.
Sure. I mean, we are kind of going in circles here. I don't know how much more ground we can tread. I don't know how much time you've got either, but I mean, it was great having you on. I think this was a great conversation. I think we
we certainly align on several things. It's just kind of a strategic difference in a few areas, I'd say. Well, hey, I have a question for you and your viewers. I mentioned before that what you were describing with like no intellectual property is like something out of science fiction to me. I'm a fan of science fiction that talks about like alternate societies. So this sounds like a perfect example of something I would want to read more about from a science fiction perspective. So I was wondering if you or your audience has any recommendations for science fiction books that align with maybe not everything, but just principles or concepts you'd like to get known more, that sort of thing.
if I want to go for the easy one, technically Atlas Shrugged is a science fiction book.
Well, technically,
it took place in the future from where she from Ayn Rand lived.
I've sort of cheated. I read about 80 pages and gave up, but later I watched the movie adaptation.
Oh, terrible movies.
Well, from what I read in the first 80 pages, it seemed like it was following in the first parts.
I very much I love the book, despise the movies. I never got through the movies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it was.
Okay, someone's saying "Stranger in a Strange Land." Yeah.
There you go.
Jeez,
actually, what's it? The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by.
I've read that. Yeah, Heinlein. I have read Moon is a Harsh.
Tan Staffel. I've got a book on my bookshelf. I can see it. I'm not going to bother going over there. It's there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. It's about that book is specifically about environmentalism. But yeah, no, the Moon is a Harsh Mistress. It applies. It gives you that phrase. So yeah, I would say Heinlein's gonna be he's gonna be the main one.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
I only kind of glanced at the chat every now and then. I wasn't sure if I missed anything big, but
again, thank you very much for coming on. It was I think it was a blast. Obviously, you don't do debate stuff very often, but if you ever do find reason to come on to the channel again, you're absolutely welcome.
It's the debates aren't quite my thing. It's more like I kind of see them as like if they're necessary, then yeah, let's do it. But otherwise, I'd rather just kind of get goals accomplished, that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I'll see you if I see you.
Okay, well, yeah, and if anyone was warmed up to the initiative, hopefully you see where we're coming from, and if you are an EU citizen, it ends at the end of July, that you can still sign it, and then we'll see what happens if it gets better or if it gets worse, I become enemy number one of gamers. There's a couple scenarios I could see that happening. I'm thinking, oh boy, but.
All right, yeah.
All right, good talking to you.
Yep, see ya. All right. So we had a couple of super chats. Again, thank you everybody who's stopped by. Let me just check these out. Oops, daisies, getting a little bit of a... So yeah, we had a couple of memberships from this stream before it started. Thank you very much, Buried Unborn, for the big boy role, the more advanced membership level, and Carlton Huey and Redacted as well, being members. It's always appreciated. And the members are going to be getting, whether they're a member on Ko-fi or here on YouTube. Let's just see if I can get my... no, my camera doesn't work on OBS, because I use it on Discord. But yeah, no, thank you very much for all the members. The members are going to be getting exclusive content for the upcoming Dave Smith video, the upcoming destruction of Dave Smith. I'm really leaning into him, destroying him. Dave Smith is not going to be able to withstand this video. It's going to be great. So yeah, the members are going to get sneak peeks on that, whether they're here on YouTube or over on Ko-fi. No question, just supporting what you do, so you can make this a full-time gig. Thank you very much, Lights. Ross said before that games with a subscription services like WoW would be exempt. What is stopping publishers from swapping to a monthly fee model? Yeah, I think we went over that in the debate. But thank you very much, Mad Gentleman. Big Guy says Big Poopin. Thank you. Old Nova. SKG arose on the market to address IP arising in the market. The EU is Friedman's and Capstan. Yeah, okay. Always, if you're wanting to know about that, I did do a debate the other day with Jacob Winograd on polycentrism, which is David Friedman's theory of anarcho-capitalism, which I reject. Josefu says, for $2, thank you very much. Force Zulu to play violent video games. I don't know about those violent video games. I heard they made you violent. Old Nova, many times for $2. Thank you very much. The NEP, yes, the non-aggression principle. It is the principle, and I see he's asking me to steelman it here. It says that you should not initiate conflicts. You should not commit aggression. That is the basic claim made by the non-aggression principle. So the way you'd go about doing this, it's very long. I go over it fully in my video, Anarcho-Capitalism Responding to the Critics. The basic idea is that when you enter into law, it's this problem where Crusoe and Friday, they can't both use the stick at the same time. They can have conflicts. So the question that law poses is, okay, how do you deal with conflicts? There are three basic answers to this problem. Either you deal with them with just who cares, just initiate conflicts at your will, might makes right, all those types of things. They're called the law of the jungle. Or you have the non-aggression principle, which says don't initiate conflicts, or you have some sort of mix between the two. Sometimes you initiate them, sometimes you don't. So I regard that the law of the jungle and mixed law both violate basic principles in metaphysics. They both rely on the primacy of consciousness, which is a soul and concept fallacy. So you should definitely look into that if you're interested. Josefu, for $2, thank you very much. Zulu and Ross should kiss. Well, maybe. Admetos, for $10. I'm surprised to see an Australian here. Go over natural law with him if you want. I think he's been very good faith. Maybe. I mean, the guy's very busy. I think he's only doing these types of streams because he's trying to get the petition passed. Josefu, force Zulu to play Bioshock. I don't know, maybe someday I'll do gaming videos. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody who stopped by. It was a blast. Thank you everybody who donated, and just everybody who watched, anybody who shared. Yeah, I'll